Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and I am joined once again by CBS Sports draft analyst Chris Trapasso. We march closer and closer to the NFL draft, Chris. And as we arrive in the month of April, what's on your mind, man? Like, what are you thinking about the most? We got some pro days going on. Hey, I can't believe it. Cam Ward threw the ball for completions to his receivers at his pro day. Great job. Golf clap for Cam Ward. Another quarterback with a good pro day. Thumbs up to you, Cam Ward. But no, seriously, I think that we're getting closer to the Titans taking Cam Ward as their quarterback. They've done nothing else in free agency. So if that drama is off the board, and then we're hearing they're not entirely sold and someone could trade up, which always happens with the top quarterbacks. We heard that last year, even though those teams were never making a move. So what else? What else are we thinking about?
I'm really thinking about, and maybe it's just because we are like a month away from the draft or, somewhere around there, like what is going to transpire in the back half of the first round? Because I feel like we are in to see more surprising quote unquote first rounders than like ever before, because there's not 4 or 5 locked in wide receivers. The offensive tackle group is Will Campbell, Armand Membu. Does Josh Simmons from Ohio State still go in the first round? Does Ariante Ursary from Minnesota, does he go in the first round? We don't really have a consensus on Tyler Booker, who we've talked about from Alabama. There's just enough blue chip prospects at the top with Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, things like that. Abdul Carter, James Pierce, Mason Graham. But like it feels like normally at this point, we're like, okay, here are the 5 receivers. I don't know what order they're going to go in, but here are the receivers. All right, these 2 tight ends, these 3 off-ball linebackers. It feels like there is more of a wide variety of opinions and projections for these players. So I'm really thinking and wondering, are we going to ultimately get to April 24th and be like, hey, we don't know. Like after pick 16, when all the quote-unquote blue chippers are quote-unquote gone, are we going to maybe see like, oh my God, Jaden Higgins, the wide receiver from Ohio State, goes in the first round, or his teammate, Darian Porter, who tested through the roofs at Indianapolis at the combine, the cornerback, does he go in the first round? Who falls out of the first round? Or are we going to start to get some crystallization, whether it be from mock drafts from Daniel Jeremiah or reports here and there from Jordan Schultz and Adam Schefter? So that's kind of where I feel like normally we have a better idea of like maybe 20 to 25 of the first rounders. This year, it feels like 16, and then everyone's got their own opinion.
Well, you are walking right into my topic of conversation for the show, which I have looked at 2 different websites, Grinding the Mocks and Mock Draft Database, that grab from all sorts of different mocks and then put together consensus boards for us to look at and also track how those things change and where players go with their draft stock. Because I don't know that the league is actually changing players' draft stock, but yet with the mocks, they are constantly rising. And all of a sudden, it's so funny about how sometimes somebody will bring up a prospect and everybody starts looking into him and go, wait a minute, this guy could actually go higher than we think. And that is Kyle Williams
Yes.
of Washington State.
Okay. The only reason that I'm laughing is I did a TikTok live yesterday, and someone asked a question about Kyle Williams, and I found myself going on like a 3-minute rant, not to be like a curmudgeon, but almost just to question, like, is this like an ad campaign for Kyle Williams? Like a few people in the media tweet about, like, they tweet him like winning off the line of scrimmage. And I love Sam Monson. He did it. He's great. I've been listening to him, following his work at PFF and now 3013 for like 15 years. But it was like all at once, there was this avalanche, and it was like, now suddenly Kyle Williams might be a first rounder. And it was like, where was this before? Like, I think he's a good prospect. I think he's firmly on day 2. We do get to see those every year. There's 3 or 4 of those players that suddenly Daniel Jeremiah sends out a tweet and we're like, whoa, what does that mean? Does that mean he's hearing something? Or does Daniel Jeremiah or Mel Kiper's opinions matter more than anyone else? Can they actually move up and down a player's draft stock? So I just wanted to jump in there. And I was laughing when you said Kyle Williams. I was thinking the same exact player, because this past week it has been like his agent did a really good job, or it's the biggest coincidence in draft history that all of these analysts started talking about him all at the same time.
I think it's obvious. He was in my last draft sim before we had even talked about him. He was my mid-round wide
Yes.
receiver. And I heard Mike Renner talking about him on the
Mhm.
Check the Mike podcast. And I sent Mike a message and he's going to
Renner's
come on the
great too.
show. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Renner's the best. He's going to come on the show soon and we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but maybe the recent Kyle Williams hype. But it's always interesting to just follow that. And it
Mhm.
does not always correlate to where these guys actually pick. And then sometimes it does. Like Trayvon Walker was all of a sudden, people got wind that he could go way higher than expected. And then he lands at number 1 pick in the entire draft, kind of out of nowhere over Aiden Hutchinson. So I'm sure that we can come up with a handful of these throughout the years where either the draft analysts got word from people in the NFL that they have overlooked player X, Y, or Z, or they all started talking about somebody and then they totally missed on that and the guy wasn't picked as high as they expected. So, because of that intrigue, I have gathered from those two consensus websites top fives at each position that the Vikings are expected to be interested in. And I want to go through them and hear your thoughts. Like, should this be the consensus top five? And
Right.
also, which ones of these guys should be on a Viking fan watch list as the draft approaches? So why don't we start
Let's
with
do
the
it.
position that I still think is very high on the Vikings list, which is defensive tackle. I know they got two guys on 2-year contracts, but they're not long-term investments in Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave. So defensive tackle is still going to be something I'll be looking at. Here is the list. Consensus top five using both mock draft database and cross-checking with grinding the mocks. Mason Graham is number 1, Kenneth Grant number 2, Derek Harmon number 3 from Oregon, Walter Nolan number 4, and Darius Alexander, the Toledo guy, representing Maction at the number 5 spot. So how do we feel about the list? Are they missing anybody? And then also, who should the Vikings have on their list out of this group?
Well, first I will speak to the power of the aggregate. That in general, if you're grabbing however many mock drafts that mock draft database and grinding the mocks are pulling from, there is a lot of power in that. So this is like me. This is like the movie 300. There's me against 10,000 mock drafts out there. So I think this top five is really good. And if you have Mike Renner on, if you have Sam Monson on, they would probably agree this is pretty much the consensus, which makes sense that you're pulling it from that. Kenneth Grant to me. So I've had like a weird, this is going to sound so nerdy for like from a draft angle. I've had a weird voyage with Kenneth Grant in that I don't think he provides, and I said it last week, he does not provide the classic pass rush ability that I would normally want out of a first or an early second round defensive tackle. But at 6'3" and 330 pounds, he's a plus run defender. And this also sounds weird that Michigan just had their pro day this week. If you look at Kenneth Grant's RAS, it's like in the mid sixes or close to 7, which you're like, oh, that's at 6'3" and 330 pounds. Normally, those guys, if you look at other like potential options, if you've gone deep down lists of defensive tackles, bigger guys that are 6'2, 6'3, 320, 330, their RASs are all super low. Like unless you're getting a Vita Vea or a Dexter Lawrence, usually the legitimate nose tackles, it's very hard for them to have a high RAS, relative athletic score. So Kenneth Grant is about as explosive as you're going to get at 330, 335. So and he's only 21 years old. He's turning 22 in his rookie season. We've talked about, hey, the league doesn't care anymore. And, we shouldn't. These guys are 25. Like Darius Alexander, who's on this list, is already 24 years old, or I think is going to be 24 years old. Kenneth Grant has legitimate upside. And so he's someone that with the athleticism at his size, the explosion, and being that he's only 21 years old, I probably have him graded a little bit lower than he probably should be. And maybe I'll tweak that slightly going in and just like maybe in the explosiveness category. In terms of Derek Harmon, we've agreed on him that he is just a monster, 6'5", 310, 3 tech, 1 tech, 5 tech, gets up the field, big tackle radius, was awesome at Michigan State, transfers to Oregon, looks the part, the analytics profile is certainly there. And the same is true with Walter Nolan, that he's not the 3 or 4 year production type player, but the up the field electricity is just spectacular. To me, he's my number 2 interior pass rusher in this class. And you can probably get some of the reason why, because I just very much like you do, prioritize how good of a pass rusher are you. I'm not really concerned how big you are. Can you get up the field? What was your production like as a pass rusher? And in the SEC last season, Walter Nolan checked those boxes emphatically, and he's young. We didn't get to see him work out, which is a bummer. I think he would have tested awesomely. The one name that I would say should belong in here somewhere, and I will get very quickly to Darius Alexander, TJ Sanders from South Carolina, for a lot of the same reasons that I just mentioned from Walter Nolan. That Walter Nolan got up the field, created a lot of pressure on a routine basis. TJ Sanders did the same at South Carolina, tested very well. He's kind of a unique, undersized, quote unquote, player that he's not 310, 320, but I don't really want my defensive tackles that small anymore. So he would be the only one that I would necessarily, or that I would add. And as for Darius Alexander, he's my Muhammad Wilkerson guy that he can play up and down the line of scrimmage, drop into coverage. Maybe for the Vikings, that's exactly what they want. Athleticism is certainly there. Production is pretty good. Even in the MAC, I'm okay with his production that he had. It would maybe just be the fact that he's a little older, probably why he's further down on this list, and why he's not like my number 15 defensive tackle, but he's a little lower to me, and I would replace him with TJ Sanders from South Carolina.
So let me circle back to the Kenneth Grant point, because all these other guys that we're talking about, Derek Harmon from Oregon, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, Darius Alexander with his production is just tremendous. So you adjust it for the MAC, but it's also incredible in the MAC. Like, hey, Khalil Mack, once upon a time, did the same thing. So we've seen players make that jump as pass rushers and succeed in the NFL. Kenneth Grant is the hardest one for me, because when I look at his analytical profile, he does have a decent pass rush win rate and pass rush grade. So it's not like he was never getting after the quarterback and he was just this big mountain. And I do think that some of the players that are like him in the NFL have been extremely valuable in a universe that we talk about all the time, where, hey, teams are trying to run the ball more and everybody wants to play 2 deep safeties. Well, if you can have one guy who takes care of a lot of people, and we've seen the Vikings go up against Vita Vea before. Derek Brooks is a great example of this, because, am I thinking of the right guy? Not Derek Brooks. Why do I always call him Derek Brooks? That's the linebacker. Derek Brown,
Derek
from
Carolina.
Derek Brown from Carolina. But we've seen these guys, even though they don't have huge numbers, they put up pressures because they push the pocket. So they don't get 8 sacks, but they get 35, 40 pressures. Delvin Tomlinson. Yeah, Kenny Clark is like this. Delvin Tomlinson at his best. And if you were taking a Delvin Tomlinson caliber player that might even be a little bit bigger, although Tomlinson is a mountain, I mean, that's a pretty darn good draft pick to work around with 2 other defensive tackles who get after the passer and some development defensive tackles and a team that loves to rush around those bodies and move bodies up front with Harrison Phillips. But Harrison Phillips isn't the same size as someone like Kenneth Grant. So I was a little down on the idea initially, but the fact that he is your 10% for pass rush win rate is, I think you mentioned this as a baseline. Like, you rarely find guys who succeed with less than a 10%, and he's about 9.5. So I don't mind that idea for the Vikings. And I like a guy in this particular defense that can take up some gaps and allow you to do a lot of things around it, where you might look at the end of the year and go, okay, was he great? But then opposing teams did not enjoy playing against him, and he allowed a lot of other people to do a lot of things.
Yeah, that's exactly, it's like a conundrum with him, because in my scouting gradebook, where I have the 5 skill and talent categories, like, explosion is number 1. And even if you think, oh my God, he moves so well, he's moving well relative to being 330. He's not as explosive as Derek Harmon, who's like 310 and 6'5". He's not as explosive as Mason Graham, as Walter Nolan. So yes, he does have pass rush ability, but like you're saying, like, being at 9.5 for a 330 pounder is awesome. I just didn't see to the level of some of the other, like, premier pass rushers in this class, which is why I have a little bit of a lower grade. But everything that you pointed out, like, I wouldn't have him as the number 2 defensive tackle in this class. It wouldn't be shocking if he's gone even before number 24, based exactly on what you just mentioned, that he can be a great run plugger. He plays with high energy. He's not static. He's not just eating doubles and that's it. And like I mentioned at the outset of this, teams could look and say, hey, we're going to kind of zig when the rest of the NFL is zagging, where we like the fact that he's 21 years old, that a team is going to draft Darius Alexander and be like, all right, we have a high floor NFL ready player who's not really going to improve much. With Kenneth Grant, you're like, we don't know how good he could be. Could he become, a Vita Vea type where he's a great pass rusher that maybe doesn't start off like that, but by 22 or 23 years old, then he is. So it's like, looking at it just from my scouting grade book, I think I have him graded like in the high or the low 50s. But if he goes way higher than that, I would be completely fine with it, because he's really unique in this super loaded draft class that's filled with up the field pass rushers on the inside.
Well, you know who that also reminds me of, that came into the league and was not considered a huge pass rusher and then became that because he had the raw skills, is Dexter Lawrence. His early
100%.
production early in his career was okay-ish. And then he takes this big step forward, and the Vikings were on the wrong side of that on numerous occasions where Dexter Lawrence just destroyed them. But this guy has the rare size and athleticism to at least have that ceiling. And even if
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't hit that ceiling and become a legitimate sack threat, he still is a guy that you could play 500 or 600 snaps and stuff gaps. So I've liked this idea more and more, even though I've kind of set my focuses more on Derek Harmon and Walter Nolan. Let's
Mm-hmm.
move to the cornerback position, which I think these two spots are still, and this will be another podcast, at the top ranking for what we think the Vikings would do. Just real quick on Kenneth Grant, though, what I can't figure out, if you look at the mock draft database, it's got him at 24th. And I don't know if you can't get him from trading down, because we all are looking at the Vikings and trade down. So if you can't get him, like if you have to invest just the first round pick and you can't get other people, I'm not sure that you want to do that. I'm not sure that he's worth that. But again, that's another discussion. Let's take a look at corners. Travis Hunter, number one, obviously.
Yes.
Then it gets very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Will Johnson from Michigan is number two. I'm sorry, is it? We just looked up the pronunciation on Barron.
Jahdae Barron.
Okay,
Jahdae
Jahdae.
Barron.
Yeah, Jahdae Barron from Texas, who is my favorite cornerback other than Travis Hunter here. Super smart, 4'4". I don't care how long his arms are. Jahdae Barron. Maxwell Hairston's an interesting one. Blazing fast. I think he's going to get overrated a little because of that. And Azareye'h Thomas from Florida State. They don't have my other favorite in the top five, which is more of a trade down, and that is Trey Amos from Ole Miss, who I think projects as a super solid player with some size and does a lot of things well, but doesn't have a blazing fast or huge production or something that's going to put him into this top five. But I think you could rank several other corners in the mix. Revel from East Carolina is another guy that you could have in this. How do you feel about the top five here?
This is the most difficult position to rank and to grade in this class, especially not being privy to the medical information for Revel from East Carolina, from East Carolina, and Ben Morrison from Notre Dame. Because when you watch Ben Morrison on film, he was one of the first corners I watched after Travis Hunter and Will Johnson. And I was like, oh my God, this guy's man coverage ability and ball skills are through the roof. Both of those players, I have them graded higher because I'm like, okay, I'm not trying to factor in, well, how hurt are they? When can they come back? How much athleticism will they have? Like, I can't do that. If they're healthy, I think Revel and Morrison are top three cornerbacks in this class. I'm very high on them. Really like the ball skills, the man coverage ability. Those are huge for me. We talked about it, that I kind of do a little bit of like box score scouting. We talked about it last week with Xavier Watts. If you're around the football a lot in college, decent chance you're going to be around the football a fair amount in the NFL. Two other names that I would throw in here. Trey Amos, you talked about. Darian Porter from Iowa State. He ran 4.30. He's 6'3", like 195, over 33-inch arms. We did talk about Jeff Okudah and being that case study of like, maybe you don't want your corners that big. Reminds me a lot of Tariq Woolen of the Seahawks, who had one, like, I think 2023 had like 6 or 7 interceptions or 8 interceptions for the Seahawks. came back to earth last year, kind of a boom or bust player. The change of direction ability for Darian Porter, I think, is really good too, which doesn't necessarily mean that he's an amazing man coverage guy. I think he can sit back in zone, plant and drive on the football with that length then and be outstanding. He's not a great tackler, which maybe that's why he's not kind of perceived to be one of those top 5 players. But if we're going to say that the first round is all about traits, Darian Porter, I think, belongs there. And maybe for the first time in history of me coming on this show, or maybe this is the Chris Trapasso draft show, whatever, you and I are going to disagree. Jahdae Barron did not do it for me on film. He didn't. And I'm saying that I'm realizing I'm putting myself out on a limb because I can't find anyone else who feels the same way as me. So either this is going to be a freezing cold takes clip, or I'm the only one that's right. I don't know. It seems like everyone, like I've seen mocks where he's going like in the top 15, top 12. To me, and I'll admit, a lot of what goes into my evaluations is like strict scouting stuff where I'm like, ooh, the short arms kind of bug me. And that he's not that big and he played on the outside and inside. And he's one, though, that I like to look at, and I'm sure you would be into this too. PFF has him with 25 combined interceptions and pass breakups in his career at Texas. And you're like, whoa, that's a lot. On 246 targets. That's not a lot. That's a pretty low number. And when I watched him on film, I didn't see him making that many plays on the ball relative to passes thrown in his coverage area. Now, he did play a lot of zone. He's mostly a nickel. And I was certainly wrong on Trent McDuffie in the past. Maybe teams are viewing him that way, and that's what they see as his smaller zone corner that can just kind of do everything for you. But Jahdae Barron is one that I have graded much lower, that I would not have him in this top 3, top 5. And again, the traits are there. Running 4.40, fantastic. You love the experience that he got at Texas, but I don't know if the Vikings need, I mean, maybe you can answer this better than I can. I don't know if they need a slot corner, and I could see him being a quality player there. Like, I don't think he should go like undrafted, but if you want to try to move him up to the outside or play some safety, I would have a little bit more concerns. Ball skills, and I don't think he's a great tackler either. So I would substitute Trey Amos, who is someone that we certainly agree on, and Darian Porter from Iowa State for Jahdae Barron. Will Johnson, too, with the injury. You just don't know about, his tackling inefficiency last year, business decisions, things like that. So he's kind of a toss-up for me as well.
So my thing with Barron is really about the data with him.
Okay.
He had a 91.5 coverage grade from PFF when playing in zone, which we know the Vikings do a lot of. Also, my previous intern before she joined the Detroit Lions, she did a really cool study on the old Purple Insider newsletter, purpleinsider.football, where she looked at the PFF coverage grades and how they correlated in the year that players got drafted at the cornerback position. Now, it shouldn't be shocking to you that players who played better in college performed better in the NFL. But there were a few, like Derek Stingley had that amazing year, then fell off the year before, but that was kind of an aberration. Most of the time, they correlated pretty closely of what guys were going to do in the NFL. Now, it's never 1-to-1. It's like if you're 51% of that, that's a good correlation. But the point just being that he scored so highly in the zone coverage. And I also look at it as we might be moving away a little bit from calling guys pure outside and nickel corners because teams are using motion so often. They're using stacks and bunches. It's like, well, this guy was technically the outside corner, but he's right next to the hash. Like he's not all the way on the
Stack
outside.
Formations,
Right. This is not
condensed.
and Deion Sanders lined up against each other and not moving at all. And then they go off the line of scrimmage. Like this is lots of moving parts. So IQ plays a huge, huge role in it. I understand what you're saying. Definitely, we have to look at the percentages of interceptions and pass breakups per target. But I'll give you one more stat on Barron. When he was targeted in 2024, opposing quarterbacks had a 34 quarterback rating when throwing at Barron, which is pretty impressive. Gave up no touchdowns. So my thing is this with corners. This one's harder to figure out though, because the dude who knows which corner he can watch and place into his system is Brian Flores.
100%.
I can guess, but I am not Brian Flores when it comes to watching. That was the whole Mekhi Blackmon thing, where well, they overdrafted him according to this or according to that. And it's like, but don't we think that the guy who came up with scouting and coached defensive backs and all those things and has raised all these great defensive backs in the NFL probably has a better idea of this? Not that he's going to be right and the consensus wrong 100% of the time, but if they pick a guy, I'll be like, oh, that guy, good pick, right? Because Brian Flores is the one doing it.
Yeah, and I don't think you can say that about every defensive coordinator, but
For
like you
sure.
said, his history of coming up in scouting, learning under Bill Belichick, and his track record with guys like Mekhi Blackman and Cam Dantzler and Byron Murphy, going from like a decent corner to a interception machine. Like, he really has the leeway to say like, all right, Chris and Matt, don't criticize me for this, or Chris, don't, we picked Jahdae Barron, don't criticize me. I know the exact type of guy and not only that, the system being so complex and one of the most the blitz heaviest in the league, I think he does have some of that, runway to be like, hey, you know what, when it comes to D-backs and corners, Brian Flores, if again, he's probably very much involved in the pre-draft process. The corner that they pick for Brian Flores, if he's pounding the table for it, we probably should just believe them and just see how the player plays ultimately instead of immediately criticizing it.
And the other thing is, I'll say too, you watch all these players. This is why I like our combination. I read everything on these players from the people who watch them and then look at all the numbers, which is how
Mm-hmm.
I do my draft prep because I don't know what I'm looking at necessarily. And also, I don't know when I would do that during the
Yeah, you
during
do
the
not have
season.
time.
So, but I over the years, many years of reading draft profiles, reading analytics sheets on guys, feel like I have a good sense for what can fit potentially with
Sure.
Flores. Barron and Amos to me are the best there. Let's go to the safety position, which is suddenly getting a little more buzz for the Vikings, knowing that Harrison Smith is coming back, but you don't know how many more years that's going to happen. And not to mention, we all like Theo Jackson. We've all been impressed with Theo Jackson, but he's not locked into the starting position if they could get somebody else who's a top draft pick. So here's the top 5 at the safety spot. Malachi Starks, Nick Emenware, Xavier Watts from Notre Dame, Andrew Mukumba. I'm not
Makuba, I think.
familiar with his game. Uh,
Okay.
and Kevin Winston Jr., who is out of Penn State, who I believe got hurt this year. Is that right
Yes.
with Winston?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we feel about this group?
It's pretty good. I think I have Makuba below Kevin Winston, but everything else is my exact top 5. There's a safety from Clemson, RJ Mickens, that I actually like a lot. Go look at his combine profile, tested very well, 4-year player for them. Doesn't miss a lot of tackles, good ball skills. But yeah, this is probably the consensus top 5. Again, I'm a little surprised that Makuba is as high as he is, but it's probably because exactly what you mentioned, that Kevin Winston got injured, I believe, in week 2 against West Virginia on film. And this is a lofty statement. Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions is the best tackling defensive back I've ever scouted. Kevin Winston was tracking toward that distinction to really challenge him. And I remember, I think 2 weeks ago or whatever, we did a draft sim. I think it was the one where we were kind of going together and like making the picks as they were happening. You clicked on Kevin Winston's profile on the PFF big board, and it showed that he did not miss a tackle in 2023. You know how hard that is and how rare that is at the safety position in college? It like never happens. And Kevin Winston is like 6'2", 210, and looks like a Malachi Starks or Nick Emenware type of athlete. Very dynamic, sudden speed, plays with his hair on fire. So really the only reason why he's not maybe flipped even with Xavier Watts, who we talked about at length last week, just instincts and ball skills galore, is because of the injury. So these are the top 5, and a lot of them would make sense. I would say Xavier Watts, Makuba, actually the last 3, Watts, Makuba, and Kevin Winston are probably the best in terms of just ranging from the deep middle. If that's more of what the Vikings want to groom under Harrison Smith, if they want more strong safety types, to kind of learn from Josh Metellus and then ultimately take over, it would be the first 2 in Malachi Starks and Nick Emenware.
So what I keep coming away with these positions in these top fives is even if you gave me the fifth best guy or the fourth best guy as the Vikings pick, I'm like, okay, that
Yep.
sounds pretty darn good. Cause yeah, I was looking at Winston's grades for 2023, just absolutely fantastic. Played in a lot of different places, rushed the
Hmm.
passer from time to time. He was a really great ascending prospect and then got hurt. But someone like Eminware, I'm a little bit more skeptical of
Okay.
because the combine riser is always concerning to me. Malachi Starks, I have seen him play and his movement skills, fluidity, and I'm not concerned at all that Lewis Seen was the same safety out of Georgia. I'm not worried about that. Different players, and I think that he has a real football playery type of nature, like ball hawk, can do it all. So if they ended up landing Starks as
Mm.
someone who could work with Harrison Smith and then develop into the future in a Brian Flores defense, I think that's a more valuable position than other places in the NFL. And I think that there's sort of the driver and the sidecar. And the
Mm.
Vikings allowed the sidecar to go get a $60 million contract with Indianapolis. And
Yeah.
everybody loves Cam Bynum. He's a great guy. He's a really good player. Everyone likes him. $60 million for the sidecar is not really something that they should be doing.
Mm.
If you're looking for the next leader, the next driver, that's where you take someone like Starks. The rest of them, I would not want the Vikings to go high with. But if
Mhm.
we're talking about trading down into the second, into the third round, where you could get a safety that has a profile like Kevin Winston, then you've got my attention because I think the third round is still a place where you can get a difference making type of safety.
And I picked Xavier Watts in my 3-round mock draft that we talked about last week after I traded back. I would only pick in this entire class for any team inside the top 20 or top 25, Starks or Eminware in those positions. Later than that, I think I have like an early 2 on Xavier Watts, Makuba, Kevin Winston on day 2. The one thing I will say in defense of Eminware, and believe me, I get is this a workout warrior? Is this someone that's not really that good? Um, I loved him on film, and I talked about it with Jahdae Barron. I like to look at the percentage of pass breakups and interceptions to targets. Eminware's pass breakups to interceptions to target rate is 26.6%, which I haven't maybe entered into my algorithm every single safety prospect in this class, but right now that is the highest at the position. So he didn't see 246 targets like Jahdae Barron did, and this is obviously going from corner to safety, but when the ball was in Nick Eminware's vicinity, he made a play on it, and I think that directly speaks to his explosiveness and the speed that we saw at the combine. It's the guys like, and we're not going to talk about him, but like Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, the edge rusher, has a 10 RAS, but like his pressure rate is super low. It's like, why were you not like creating a pressure every other snap if you were that athletic? Eminware's ball skills and his ball production match with what he showed in Indianapolis, which is why I'm very high on him at safety.
I think another guy who was like that was Jordan Davis out of Georgia, where everybody got enamored with what he did at the combine. And he was a good
Yep.
player in college, but he gets
Yes.
super high drafted when he was probably more of a second round pick type of
Yes, he
player. And
was.
he's the forgotten man on that Philadelphia Eagles defensive line who doesn't play as much, which speaks to their freakish depth. But the point just being that that's why, like, there's a long history of who was the wide receiver that ran the 4.2, who had no business being a first
Oh,
round draft pick.
Brashad Berryman?
Okay, that's one.
He's one of them.
Who was the guy
John
that
Ross?
set John Ross? Yeah,
John
John
Ross.
Ross. Like small, wasn't really a route runner, was kind of a deep guy that Jake Browning, I think, threw up deep passes to and he caught them. And then he goes that high because he ran a crazy fast 40. So you do have that hesitation. But when those things come together, freakish athleticism and production, that's where you end up with superstar caliber players. So I'm
Yep.
only really interested in either 24th pick Malachi Starks or Eminware, and the rest of them would be farther down the board, I think.
Can I throw one more name in there, which I'm just looking, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, he's my 6th safety. Hunter Wohler, the safety from Wisconsin. Now, a lot of your listeners in the Big Ten, Gophers playing the Badgers, Hunter Wohler, 6'2", 215. is a very good athlete. He is certainly going to play more of that strong safety role, and you don't want Hunter Wohler like matching up with Josh Downs in the slot. But when it comes to being that additional player in the box, occasionally making a play at the intermediate level, and I think he has got decent range in the back end. Hunter Wohler is, if you're going to tell me third, fourth round, that range is where you think the Vikings will go, or you think it would still be a prudent pick, pinpoint that name, because the athleticism is there that I think Kwesi would like, and the production, and in a big body that looks like that classic Cam Chancellor, strong safety linebacker hybrid position. That's someone that I really like in the middle of this draft. I think is going to outplay his draft position.
So, 2 shows in a row, we have some breaking news, but this is not in pertaining to the Vikings, but I am curious about your take. The
Okay.
New York Giants have signed Russell Wilson to play quarterback for the, yeah, I know. Russell Wilson, and yeah, this just came across. Russell Wilson
The Giants?
and Jameis Winston, I guess, are going to compete for that job there with the New York
Those are
Giants.
what is happening? Those are two opposite dudes at this point of their careers. I mean, really, at any point of their careers. And now, having watched Russell Wilson a lot last season, my nephew is a Steelers fan, and like 2 or 3 games into him starting, he was like, oh my God, if the first read is not there, he just doesn't know what to do. 2015 Russell Wilson could run around and make ridiculous things happen. That is no longer the case. Jameis Winston wants to throw the ball 700 times a season from the pocket. He doesn't care who he throws it to. Someone will catch it. It might be the other team. Russell Wilson is so risk averse. That is going to be one of the more fascinating quarterback competitions. And maybe does that take them out of the running at 3 for the quarterback? Probably.
It might do that. I thought you were going to say, does it take them out of the running for Aaron Rodgers, which I think is quite clear 100% that it does take them out for Aaron Rodgers. It shouldn't take them out for Shedeur Sanders, but it also might be a tell. It might be a tell that the New York Giants don't think that Shedeur Sanders is worth the number 3 pick.
No.
Or they think that the Cleveland Browns are going to take Shedeur Sanders. I personally have been skeptical about whether he ends up being drafted in the first round or as high. And now there's a lot of discussion about the Jackson Dart, which I think you mocked Jackson Dart for somebody trading into the first for Jackson
It was
Dart.
actually the Giants.
Okay, the Giants,
Yes.
yeah. Well, which of course this doesn't keep them from doing that necessarily, but I think it might be a signal. I don't know, maybe not. It might be a signal that they're not really buying into Shedeur Sanders, because if you had Jameis Winston, then you would say, all right, well, you could draft Sanders, have those two compete, have Jameis Winston do the half a season and then bench him for the rookie type of thing, even if you don't think Sanders is ready. But if you're going out and signing Russell Wilson, that does not scream to me, oh, we can't wait to get Shedeur Sanders in our building.
Well, I mean, you're preaching to the choir, and the second time that I'm going to reference that I did a TikTok live, which I like to do every, for like the last month going into the draft during the day at the end of my workday. Just yesterday when I did mine, I spoke to the fact, I think someone asked me about the Giants, and I was like, well, to me with Jameis Winston already, I think that in and of itself kind of showed that they were like, Shedeur Sanders would not be the number 3 overall pick in any draft other than this one. And I'm going back to what you asked me at the beginning, like, what am I looking forward to? After just seeing who are some of those surprise first rounders, which always make that Thursday night so much fun as we're getting into 10:30 and 11 and 12 o'clock at night. My second thing I'm most looking forward to is we're going to ultimately see in 3.5 weeks if we see Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward and Jackson Dart and someone trades up for Jalen Milroe, or it's the 2022 draft class and only one goes, and Shedeur Sanders is like a late second rounder and Jackson Dart goes way later, and it was all just just made up like that. Oh my God, we got to be excited about Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis and Sam Howell and who was the Ole Miss Matt Corral. Like maybe that's what we're getting a signal from the Giants signing Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I was thinking with Shedeur of Will Levis, how the entire universe
Oh yeah, he was one too.
Completely convinced that he was going to be a top 10 draft pick, and then he does not end up going until the second round, which I could see being the case with Sanders, or I could see Cleveland taking him at number 2 because they're so desperate for the quarterback position. I mean, right now they have Kenny Pickett. So that might be
Mm,
more signal there. And then it could be interesting if quarterback goes 1-2. That's what's crazy about Sanders is you could see somebody just saying, I don't know, we need a quarterback. That's our guy. We're just taking him. The whole like Daniel Jones thing where nobody really thought he was a top pick. And then suddenly the Giants are
this,
desperate. They
yep.
see him play at the Senior Bowl and they take him. There's a lot of different ways that direction could go. So let's get back on track on what we were doing here. The
What
top
position's
fives
next?
from the consensus boards at the moment and who might be interesting for the Vikings out of these boards. So let's get to interior offensive line. Now, you could throw in any tackles that you like in this mix, but here is the consensus interior line. Tyler Booker, from Alabama, Gray Zabel, who we've mentioned 500 times. Donovan Jackson is very interesting to me. The way that he moved to me at the combine was like, whoa, you don't see guys at the guard position move like that. And he did play some tackle. I don't know how to pronounce the Arizona kid's name. Jonah
I think it's Inea. Sava Inea.
Savanea. Okay. And Marcus Embo is number 5 here. This to me says, and again, if we assume that Kelvin Banks is a tackle and is going to go higher because he's a good football player from Texas, this to me says that this guard group is not particularly special. And if you want to trade down, you might be able to get the number 1 player on the consensus board and still be trading down. There might not be, everyone's talking about guards, 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 guards. I'm not even convinced out of this group that there's going to be more than 1 or 2 guards taken in the first round. I think there will be some tackles that people want to move, but I'm not 100% sold that this is like the year of the guard.
100% agree with you that I think to see 2 from that list, Gray Zabel, Donovan Jackson. I mean, maybe there's just some of my own bias there that I think those 2 could be first round picks. I would take Tyler Booker out of the number 1 spot. I think his combine did enough damage to his stock that still, I think I have him as my, just again, pure offensive guards or interior offensive lineman. I'm just looking at my scouting gradebook over here. I still have him as the 3rd best pure guard, but not number 1. When pre-combine, you would see him in mocks all the time. Oh yeah, this is the one true guard, maybe with Donovan Jackson, who will go in the first round. The other name that I would throw in here is Tate Ratledge from Georgia. He's the guy that had the crazy mullet, tested really well. I think he ran like sub 5.0 or right around there. If you look at the vertical, the broad jump, I don't remember the exact numbers. They were really good. And on film, he kind of has that Georgia, Alabama. I kind of see those 2 schools as so similar with just like the coaching similarities and the scheme and the amount of NFL talent that they send to the league. He has that strength that we would normally see out of a Georgia or an Alabama offensive lineman. Good length as well. So he would be the only one that I would throw in there. Marcus Embo from Purdue is a right tackle that's probably going to be a guard. Did not work out whatsoever during the pre-draft process. What was weird is his pro day, the Purdue pro day, was like a few days after the combine, or it was like he did not have enough time to come back from injury as to why he didn't work out in Indianapolis. He's a fun movement-based, like mobility centric offensive lineman that certainly feels like he's going to be an offensive guard at the next level. So really Tate Ratledge would be the only other name that I would maybe just insert into this top 5.
I will throw you out a name of a guy that I think could be mid-round for the
Okay.
Vikings if they're going guard, and that is Luke Kandra, who
Mm-hmm.
is from Cincinnati. I believe
Big time athlete.
there was a report that the Vikings were visiting with him, and he has a lot of football, and he is enormous. 6'4", 323, as you mentioned, a good athlete, has really good numbers in pass protection, multiple seasons of grading very high. He is a right guard, though, so I don't know if that changes anything for them. I mean, they just spent so much money on Will Fries. Maybe that doesn't matter when a guy's coming out, right guard versus left guard, but he's just somebody for the mid rounds. I don't think he's a high prospect to keep an eye on. But as far as the top of this group, it's only Booker, Zabel, and Jackson. The reason Booker scares me data wise is that he didn't grade particularly well as a run blocker.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, if you are Tyler Booker size, you better grade really well as a run blocker. And one thing that I get a little concerned about is this guy was huge and he was laying people out. And look, he's throwing guys, but he also takes big swings and misses. which I think does not work because you don't throw people in the NFL very often.
Mm-mm.
And if you swing and miss, you're Ed Ingram, who had some really impressive reps and way too many swings and misses. I wouldn't necessarily want that.
And when you're Tyler Booker's size, and that is like in scouting reports, if you read those things like, oh, he's a masher. If you're his size and you are not a good athlete, like that to me is kind of scary. Like you're big and slow. Like that is not the modern day NFL with how many upfield interior pass rushers there are. We talked about it last week. Even this class is so good. And you could list off 15 to 20 guys where you're like, man, Quinnen Williams and Ed Oliver. And we already talked about Kenny Clark, and Dexter Lawrence is huge, but he gets up the field. There's so many big time athletes playing defensive tackle. If you're huge and you can't really move, then that's concerning to me. When it comes to Luke Kandra, the one thing that pops into my head instantly from my scouting report on him is that he is one of the better interior blockers. And I've said this, I don't think this class is great at all, but one of the better interior blockers at literally staying attached to his block on the move. They ran so many stretch runs outside zone where he just latches on and he is literally like running almost full speed, fully attached to the defensive tackle, almost blocking him out to the sideline. And that just instantly screams Kevin O'Connell, whether that's the front side of a block or that is ultimately a bootleg for JJ McCarthy. It makes a lot of sense that the Vikings would be into Luke Kandra because he is that mobility-based offensive guard in this class.
Well, and they love to do the outside pitches with Aaron Jones,
Mm-hmm.
and Jordan Mason is also coming from the outside zone type of system, which there are very few teams that are running that pure Gary Kubiak. All the guys run that traditional, but you still see a lot of those plays mixed in that require mobility from your offensive guards. So there's the interior breakdown everyone is dreaming of. And one more position for the Vikings potential target positions is wide receiver, which we'll continue to throw out there. And, I thought that there would be pushback on that from Vikings fans. And I guess I should have expected that there wouldn't, because half of the state still has a 3-deep poster in their bedroom or in their childhood bedroom of Randy Moss, Chris Carter, and Jake Reed. So I haven't had too many people say, you guys should stop talking about wide receivers. Anything that makes JJ McCarthy better is good with me. So here's the top 5. Tet McMillan, number 1. He's going to go super high. Matthew Golden has got my attention. Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. I was only somewhat impressed. I don't know. It's hard for me to pick a guy in the first round who wasn't the best receiver on his team, but maybe you could say Justin Jefferson wasn't when he played with LSU. Luther Burden, who I've been very intrigued by, ball tracking. I know because Keenan McCardle said this to me for an article that the number one thing he looks at is ball tracking. And to me, Luther Burden is very good at that. And then Jaden Higgins, who you mentioned earlier in the show from Iowa State, right? Iowa State. Yep. That is the top 5 consensus for wide receivers. And my question is pretty obvious here. Which one of these guys would be worth a high draft pick for the Vikings?
Well, I think of all of these names, it's probably Luther Burden, because Ted McMillan is a big X receiver. They're not going to pick one of those. I mean, yeah, like if he had some catastrophic fall to 24, you'd have to consider it, I guess. But it would be it would be redundant with Justin Jefferson. Egbuka, I agree. I think he's rock solid. He reminds me a lot of A.D. Mitchell, where you're like, oh, you're big and you're fast and you played at Ohio State for so long. Like, why were you not more productive? Like, yeah, you had other good receivers, but Xavier Worthy was making catches and Matthew Golden was making catches, and A.D. Mitchell last year, that was the big knock on him, was like he wasn't insanely productive. Now, I know Emeka Egbuka has the most catches in Ohio State history, but over 4 years, a ton of targets. I would have liked to see, like you're saying, more dominance from him and more, hey, it's 3rd and 7. Let's go to Egbuka. And they never were really doing that. I mean, he played with a lot of good receivers there. I think he's a good prospect, but I wouldn't have him at 3. Why I like Burden, can play in the slot and on the outside. I've mentioned a lot of things about percentages. He forced a missed tackle on 33.6% of his catches in college. That is like Deebo Samuel level. Now, it's hard to for some people to grasp, like, hey, don't compare someone to that all-pro. That's unfair. Well, Deebo Samuel at one point was just a second rounder that people thought wasn't super fast and was just a gadget guy. Luther Burden is around the same size as Deebo Samuel. I don't think he's quite as physical, but the missed tackles are the missed tackles that he forced, and they were very close to a Deebo Samuel level. I like you mentioned, his ball tracking down the field too. If Luther Burden was just catching bubble screens and making 10 guys miss, it'd be like, okay, impressive. And, even in the SEC, you're not going to do that in the NFL as frequently. I love the way back shoulder game down the field. I thought he has very good hands. He ran in the low 4.4s at the combine. And there's been some things lately about that, maybe off the field or maturity. He's another one though, 21 years old. And, Ted McMillan's 23. Igbuka's older. Jaden Higgins, I believe, is already 24, or he's turning 24 in his rookie season. So Luther Burden would be the guy. He wouldn't be redundant necessarily to be an X with Justin Jefferson. He can play inside and out. Yards after the catch ability would certainly be there. And I think he's better vertically than a lot of people are giving him credit for, because the first thing that jumps out off the film is how good he is after the catch.
Yeah, and I'll admit that I saw him play a couple games, and I thought that there were some pretty mediocre throws going his way.
He got held back.
Yeah, he brought in. And so I was like, oh, I think he can really track that ball down the field. But he also does have good numbers in terms of getting the ball and running after catch. And you mentioned the break tackles and stuff like that. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of different things he can do. And that sounds good to me to mix with two receivers who do a lot really well in Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, and then just go to town with everyone is open. And whoever the Vikings have as a third wide receiver, how about this for a crazy stat? Jalen Naylor last year, when he was targeted by Sam Darnold,
it was it wasn't perfect passer rating.
It was close. It was close. I mean, it wasn't that often. It was only 40 targets. We had 136 quarterback rating. Whoever you're throwing to, that's not those two guys, is going to be open. So he's got my attention more than probably some of the others. I think Golden, because of his 40, is going to end up going a little bit higher than where the Vikings pick. I don't know. The problem is with some of these conversations is, would you stick and pick for this guy? And with Burden, the answer, I'm not sure. I don't know if I would. I mean, with Gray Zabel, would I do that? Maybe I would, because maybe I think he's a game-changing guy at guard. Malachi Starks, I probably would. Barron, for me, I would, but you wouldn't. Kenneth Grant, would you stick and pick for Kenneth Grant? That's the hardest conversation with all of these, because there's a lot of really enticing prospects, but I keep finding myself wanting to say, well, I mean, if Luther Burden dropped into the second round, then, you trade back and then you end up taking him. So that leads me to the last thing I wanted to ask you today on the show, Chris, is there a player that you would go Mike Ditka for and trade your entire draft? Reference. Now, let's consider that the Vikings' entire draft is 4 picks, and it's not worth that much because it's the 97th, and then it's 2 fifth rounders. So that might be able to move you up from 24 into the top 15, possibly into the top 10, if there was a team willing to do it. I don't think the Vikings are going to do this. I think that they're going to trade back. Probably that 97th pick will turn into 120, and they will get extra draft picks in the late rounds. But let's just say, hypothetically, there is a top 15 player that the Vikings make a phone call and say, we want this guy so badly that we will trade you 97 and the 2 fifth round draft picks, our entire Ditka draft, which, if you're too young for the reference, Mike Ditka traded his whole draft for Ricky Williams. It did not work out very well, even though Ricky Williams was great. Who would be that player?
Great question. I did look up. So there's 20 different, or I guess not 20. There's 3 or 4 different draft trade charts out there. One of my only previous editor, RJ White, who has now moved on to be, he's the head of CBS Sports line and the fantasy side. He's a very smart dude. He built one for us my first couple of years at CBS. I did all the math and I plugged it in, or I didn't do the math. He did the math. Google Sheets does the math. I plugged it in, all their picks, gets them to 16 or 17, maybe a little higher. So it can't even really get them that high, like you're saying, with the 2 fifth rounders.
That's incredible.
You told me this question before, and I was doing research right leading up to the show. Because we're okay, safety. There's not a corner I would do it for. there's not, I mean, if I don't want to say Travis Hunter because that's a dumb answer because there's no way he's falling at all. All the other corners, like I said during this show, there's injury concerns. Will Johnson, what's the deal with him? He's injured. Ben Morrison, injured. Revel, injured. Safety, either Malachi Starks or for me, Nick Manwari for what he could do next to Harrison Smith, where I will admit that he's not Earl Thomas or Harrison Smith in terms of his range as and instincts as a free safety. But if you let him for a season play next to Harrison Smith and say, you are going to roam the robber level of the field, intermediate level, attack, blitz with that 4.3 speed and the 40-inch vertical type explosiveness, I think Nick Manwari is someone that you would say, we are trading our entire draft. We're going to have a one-player draft class for a guy that has a relative athletic score of 10 out of 10 at a need position. Nick Manwari would probably be my pick because the first round is all about traits. He has them galore. And like I mentioned, 26.6% of the targets in his area resulted either in a pass breakup or an interception in the SEC at South Carolina.
More breaking news.
Come on,
Stephon Diggs. Yeah, I know. Stephon Diggs is signed with the Patriots on a 3-year contract, $26 million guaranteed for him, which is kind of like a 2-year deal for Stephon Diggs to go to the New England Patriots. The Patriots have done everything right around Drake May. They've spent a bunch of money. They've gone out and got a lot of veterans. And man, did this guy need wide receivers. And Stephon Diggs is a kingmaker for quarterbacks. If he's good to go ACL wise, we've seen this from Josh Allen. We saw he was still playing really well with CJ Stroud before he got hurt. And with Drake May, that's a guy that you know is going to be open, even if he's not the same deep receiver as he once was. He is going to be very helpful for them. I don't know if that takes them, nothing takes them out of the running for anything at the top of the draft.
Agreed.
So they just need players. So I ran a quick draft sim here with PFF Simulator to see who would be available at 16. And again, it's hilarious that they can use all their draft capital and move up 8 spots. But here's the guys who are on the board: Malachi Starks, Luther Burden, James Pierce, Kenneth Grant, Kelvin Banks, Walter Nolan, Matthew Golden. These are a lot of the guys who are going to be on the board at 24 if they want to do that. So maybe there's no real answer. I thought that it would be higher, that they'd be able to trade up. Let's say that someone was willing to take a little bit of an L on that.
Okay.
Even then, it's really hard to find a player who would be worth it past Abdul Carter or Will Campbell. Will Campbell is probably my answer. At left guard, Will Campbell going with Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, Darisaw, and Brian O'Neill. That I would actually do. That I would actually probably do is trade the whole for Will Campbell.
He's probably the one. I was about to settle where you just did originally. Like I was going to say, there's just not really anyone, but I wanted to give some answer just for the sake of the episode. But the Will Campbell one is not crazy because yes, he could end up being the 3rd pick to the Giants, or like him falling out of the top 10. I don't think is like completely crazy, especially with Armand Membu from Missouri being the bigger, stronger, and way more athletic tackle that kind of feels like he'll be that Andrew Thomas that goes ahead of everyone and goes higher than people expected. So he would probably be on the offensive side the answer for me, because you don't have to worry about any of the arm stuff, not having 33-inch arms, having a very short wingspan. If he's playing guard, he would still be a very athletic guard. And the film, the cleanliness that he showed on tape just as a blocker in the SEC for 3 seasons was really good. And that would be probably the best offensive line in the NFL, at least on paper. They got to gel together, but up there with the Detroit Lions is the best offensive line in the league.
And that's why it would be at least somewhat intriguing if that happened. And also probably
1-player draft class.
Insane. Just a 1-player draft class. Now it's much more likely that the Vikings go from 4 to like 10 and they trade down and they get other draft picks, and people who have extra picks are trading with them. So I would expect that we do have a much bigger draft class to cover. And if not that, I mean, the undrafted free agent pool will be huge for the Vikings as well. But if they were doing it, Will Campbell would be my answer. Chris Trapasso, tremendous breakdown in this episode. We have plenty to go. Draft buzz where the Vikings kind of settle, I think, is still very much up in the air. But if there's any more free agency moves that could impact what they potentially do, we'll talk about those. And then we'll also have some fun along the way. Coming up very soon is one of our favorite episodes of the year, a staple 90s and early 2000s comparisons for all of our favorite top draft picks. And I think we need to do a live mock of the entire draft leading up to number 24, because we can do Sims and we can do what PFF thinks, but we should do also what you think will be on the board for the Vikings. So lots of fun to come on the way. Chris Trapasso, great follow. And apparently on TikTok live all the time.
Yeah, I'm just doing them just to talk to myself. Yeah, and I do get a fair amount of questions after I'm talking to myself for a while. So I guess if you're also on TikTok when you're not listening to Purple Insider or reading the Purple Insider newsletter, be on the lookout. I think you can set like a alert or a notification if you follow me that it'll say Chris Trapasso is live. I'm going to try to do one once every day, every other day leading up to the draft, just to answer questions about prospects and team fits, things like that.
Sounds good. Thank you as always for your time, and we'll talk to y'all later.
Football.